So let me introduce another unique category here in these same kind of discussions about, fixtures, but in a more specific aspect, okay? It's called a trade fixture. A trade fixture. And so I'm going to block out something on this slide for a second just to make you think. Let me show you this. Should be about right there. Yeah, there we go. So a trade fixture, and it's also sometimes referred to as a chattel fixture. Folks, I want you to take everything that I've just taught you about the word chattel and the word fixture, and I want you to say that word, chattel fixture. And I want you to process that and tell me if you have a problem with that term. Some of you said yes. Why?
Chattel moves, fixture stays.
There you go. There you go, Bree. This is called an oxymoron. An oxymoron is where you use things side by side and they completely contradict each other. And that's exactly what this is. As Ashley just pointed out, chattel means movable personal property. Fixture means part of the real property. It's kind of confusing. If you're not familiar with other oxymorons, jumbo shrimp, icy hot, right? These are all oxymorons. So chattel is going to be the key word there. So if you ever see a trade fixture on the test, think chattel fixture, and that's going to help you out because a chattel fixture is personal property. What a chattel fixture, also called a trade fixture, is when you are a tenant in a commercial building leasing a space for business purposes, and you attach things like prep tables and walk-in kitchens and hood systems, or salon chairs or sinks, or you're actually attaching it, but because you're doing it for a trade, a business, as part of a lease, they remain, these items that you purchase and attach remain personal property, and you can take them with you at the end of your lease. That is why it's called a trade fixture, aka chattel fixture. You're allowed to take them with you at the end of your lease. Now, if you abandon them, then the owner would gain them by way of what's called accession. If you abandon personal property and somebody else's real property, it becomes theirs. But you are allowed to take these things at the end of your lease, chattel fixtures. Also called a trade fixture. So let me throw one more unique one into the mix. Now, this next one is North Carolina specific. A lot of these things that I'm teaching you, are true in both North Carolina and national. But this next one is a North Carolina specific one. You're not going to see this mentioned on the national portion of the exam. It is called an agricultural fixture. An agricultural fixture. And so it's a very unique category. And what it basically states that if we're dealing with agricultural land and things attached to that agricultural land, even if it's attached by a tenant farmer, it automatically becomes the real property of the landlord. So if you're renting farmland and you install a grain silo on that farmland, that is now the grain silo of the property owner. If you install a barn, that would be the property of the property owner. It becomes real property automatically, even though it was installed by a tenant farmer. Now, folks, please don't feel bad for this fictitious tenant farmer in this scenario. Like, that's not fair. Everything's negotiable. There is nothing stopping a tenant farmer from saying, I'm going to install this, but I'm also going to take it down when I'm done. And if the landlord and tenant agree to it, sure, why not? But what I'm saying is, by default, if we ask you a question, tenant farmer installs a grain silo on farmland he's renting. Who owns the grain silo? The landlord. It is automatically real property of the property owner when it's installed, without agreement to the contrary. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to things that you just sit out there like a barrel. It has to actually be permanently attached, installed, things of that nature. So, one last consideration here before we switch gears and start getting into some different conversations. There is some gray area of things that would normally be considered a fixture, but because of certain circumstances, it stays personal property. And so, what I'm referring to is something in North Carolina called, yet again, North Carolina specific. I'm sure other states have similar things, but in North Carolina, we call it the North Carolina Uniform Commercial Code, or UCC for short. And what the Uniform Commercial Code basically states is, if there's something that is installed or attached to a house that would normally be considered real property, but it has some type of security agreement against it by a creditor, then it would remain personal property that can be removed up until the time it's paid off in full. Let me give you a couple examples of this. First, I'll start with a simple one, and then I'll kind of work up. Folks, have you ever heard of Rent-A-Center or Aaron's? I think those places still exist, right? Most of you have heard that. They have everything under the sun. Washers, dryers, refrigerators, right? Whatever. They even have ovens and dishwashers. Well, ovens are by default considered fixtures. And so when you install an oven in North Carolina, it's supposed to stay for the new property owner. Well, if Aaron's or Rent-A-Center has a security agreement against it, they would file what's called a UCC-1 financing statement that says, we have the right to come remove this if they stop paying us before it's paid off. So even though it would normally be considered a fixture, it remains personal property or chattel. And this is obviously something that we would want to have a discussion on in the real estate industry, right? Like, oh, hey, Slick, you need to pay that off prior to closing, because if I close on this house and somebody comes and takes my oven out, I'm going to be upset. Of course, an oven is a very trivial example, but things like solar panels have this. If you are leasing the solar panels or have a financing statement on the solar panels or anything like that, they would have a UCC-1 financing statement attached against it. So even though it would normally be part of the real estate, it remains personal property until it's paid off, which we would probably argue that it would have to be paid off at closing for all parties to be okay. Everybody alive out there? Are you feeling okay? Don't worry, it gets so much worse. Well, say what? Say what, Brooks? So much worse.
So, my sister actually, it's funny, my sister mentioned this to me a couple weekends ago because we passed a house with solar panels and she informed me. And so, you have to pay the loan in full until you can sell the house. So if you get solar panels, that basically needs to be your forever home. Or there are no absolutes, and is there any wiggle?
Yeah, there is wiggle room. So that's actually a big part of our update class this year. I'm like, my hair is super fluffy in the back right now. Every time I turn my head, I'm like, I just notice it, and it's just driving me crazy. Anyway, Ashley, here's the answer. We're actually having very detailed discussions in the update course this year for licensees on solar panels because there is so much complexity to them. There is no absolute. The short answer is if they're not paid off, you can still sell your house. And one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to pay them off with your proceeds at closing, or if you find a buyer who is willing to take over the loan, that is okay. But understand that the lender is going to include that in their debt-to-income ratios, which means they've got to be able to make enough money where they can pay the monthly house payment plus make that monthly solar bill payment, and it still better not kick you out of that buckets. And so it's a lot harder to sell a house with solar panels that's not paid off, but it's not impossible.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I know it's with the pool.
Same thing with the pool, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we closed on the house, and we still owed some on the pool, and we were going to pay it off with the proceeds anyway, but it happened without us being told.
Yes, because that would be a lien against the property, and so you can't convey clear title without it being done. So the attorney was going to do that for you, whether you liked it or not. Yeah.
Fine, but
Yeah. Yep. That's right.
when the check came late, we were we were a little concerned.
Yep. Yep. There you go. That's exactly right. Yeah, we're going to talk about liens in great detail. Somebody else was saying something.
Yeah, just for clarity, I think that's what Bradley was saying, but they will take it out of basically whatever the like whatever they're paying for the buyer. It'll come out of that, whatever you owe.
You're talking about for the solar panels?
Yeah, like whatever. There may be a UCC against, like, since it has to stay to the like within the house, it has to stay with the real property. You're saying that you're not having to pay it and then it sells, but it can be paid out of the full payment.
Yes, it's going to be paid as part of closing, and so that way it's going to satisfy that UCC1 financing statement or the lien against the property or whatever it may be, so then that way it's a non-issue. The attorney is not going to, when these things are recorded, the attorney can't leave it because we can't trust people to be like, no, I swear I'm going to pay it off after closing. They're not going to believe you. They're going to say, no. We're going to pay it off after closing with your money because you can't convey clear title unless we do this. And that means you're in breach of the contract unless we do this. So, yeah. So, here's where we're going to get into, some more interesting conversations with these things. And this is actually, I think Brooks may have mentioned this yesterday, and I said it was coming up. When we're dealing with real property versus personal property, I gave you it in a nutshell, but there's another layer to it. Before we get there, though, let me just remind you about the term improvements. Improvements is a very generic term. Anything that makes a property more valuable. It could be drainage ditches, it could be roads, it could be houses, it could be septic tanks, it could be electric utilities, it could be anything like that. So these things are all considered improvements. And for the sake of the national test, improvements are appurtenances, because they run with the land. Now, there is some variation on your interpretation between what we call improvements to the land and improvements on the land. Improvements to the land are infrastructure based. Your septics, your sewers, your roads, your things like that. Because it's still just land, but it's considered improved land. You've made improvements to it. Improvements on the land are going to be your more private in nature. The house is an improvement on the land. Your fences, your, personal things are typically your improvements on the land. And of course, arguably, when you put a house, we don't just call it land anymore. Now it's real estate or real property. Just for technical aspects. So here's a very big conversation and arguably a very testable aspect to the fixture versus personal property conundrum. And this is one I said Brooks mentioned yesterday. When we're dealing with manufactured homes, well, we're going to talk about manufactured and we're going to talk about modular as well. Folks, right here, right now, understand manufactured and modular are not the same. A lot of people think they are not. Manufactured is also called mobile home, is also called a trailer. Those are the same. Manufactured, mobile home, trailer. Those are the same. Modular is something else. So we'll get to the modular in a second. Let's start with the mobile home. The mobile home, folks, is very unique in the sense of this class because the mobile home has a VIN number. Folks, what else has a VIN number? Your car. And just like your car, a mobile home is personal property. When you buy a manufactured home from a manufactured home builder, a manufactured home lot, whatever, you get a personal loan and it is personal property. It's got a VIN number and it's got a title, just like a car, a title. And so these are built in a factory and they are built on a steel chassis and they have wheels, axles, hitches, VIN numbers, and titles. And they are considered personal property by default. Now understand that while these are personal property, they can be converted to real property if certain criteria have been met. The criteria to convert a mobile home from personal property to real property is you have to remove the wheels, axles, and hitch. You have to put it on a permanent foundation on land that you also own. And last but not least, you have to file what's called an affidavit of conversion with the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV, where you basically turn in the title and you say, I'm no longer treating this as personal property. I'm treating it as real property now. And so now you'll pay real property taxes on it with your land, and you will not have to pay personal property taxes anymore. But for test purposes, mobile homes start as personal property, but can be converted to real property if these 3 specific criteria are met. Remove the wheels, axles, and hitch, put it on a permanent foundation on land that you also own, and file that affidavit of conversion and turn in the title to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Now, folks, let me tell you one reason why understanding this is exceptionally important in the real estate world. Let me backtrack a little bit here. I want you to imagine that you put in an offer, you got your license, you're a real estate broker, you're helping a buyer, and you put in an offer on behalf of a buyer, and the buyer was really interested in the refrigerator, but you don't ask for it on the contract. And the contract gets accepted. Folks, you didn't ask for the refrigerator. What's going to happen to it when the seller moves away? That's right. They're going to take it. Sergio says this, bye-bye. That's exactly right. It's gone because it's personal property that the seller's allowed to take, and you didn't ask for it. Refrigerator leaves. It's personal property unless we ask for it. So, folks, if your buyer client wanted that refrigerator and you're a dingleberry with a capital D and you didn't negotiate it, and your buyer's all upset because you didn't get them the refrigerator, you know what's about to happen, don't you? You're about to buy them the most expensive closing gift called a refrigerator because you done messed up, Ron. You screwed up. You didn't do your job right. Now you're going to buy them one to make it right with them. And folks, it's a bad day in real estate when you got to buy somebody a refrigerator because you made an oopsie. And I promise you will remember that for the rest of your life as a real estate broker when you have that oopsie. Let's take this a step further. Imagine that you put an offer in on a piece of real estate and it's 90 acres and it's got a manufactured home out there, and you just write the address of the property and make no mention of the manufactured home, and you get under contract and you get there on the day of closing and the house is gone. Folks, that's a lot bigger than a refrigerator oopsie, isn't it? Ain't no amount of money you are going to make to be able to fix this problem. You are screwed. And so it is very important that we have conversations about the manufactured home. If it's something that you want, you better make sure you clearly name it, because it may or may not have been converted to real property. So it may not by default come with the land that you're buying. Now, a couple other things to point out about manufactured homes, folks. They are, as I said, built in factories. They're built on steel chassis. That steel chassis cannot be removed. But because of the unique nature of their construction, they only have to meet what we call HUD, H-U-D, HUD, Minimum Construction Standards of Safety. HUD is short for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And as such, they are considered an exemption to local building codes. We're going to talk about building codes later, but statewide building codes exist and local citywide building codes exist that have minimum construction standards. Well, manufactured homes are exempt from them because they're never going to meet them. They do not have to meet the state and local building codes. Now, folks, this is why they say that if a tornado or hurricane's coming, you don't want to be in a manufactured home. They're lighter. They're not built quite the same level as a site-built or stick-built home. They're exempt from those building codes. So, manufactured, mobile, trailer, all mean the same thing. Starts as personal property, can be converted to real property if certain criteria are met. Modular is something different completely. Modular is built in a factory as well, but it's basically a house built in pieces. Think of it like a very grand example of Legos, right? You build a section and you attach it to the other sections. And so the big difference is this is never intended to be personal property. The pieces are built in the factory and they're carted off to a site with a foundation. And as soon as they're installed on the foundation, they're considered real property. They were never intended to be personal property. There is no title, there is no VIN number. And the other aspect of this is they do have to meet all state and local building codes. They are not exempt. Also, on a side note, we'll talk more about lending later. From a financial point of view, lending on a modular home is the same as lending on a site-built home, also called a stick-built home. Manufactured, you have to have a different loan type because they have different criteria for a lender. Typically, shorter loan terms, higher down payment requirements, minimum ages of the manufactured home, so very different from a lending point of view as well.
Can we also say that this is not a new concept?
This is not a new concept.
Sears and Roebuck used to sell homes and deliver them on a flatbed.
Oh yeah, they also had home kits where they would literally just drop off all the lumber and then you would just hire contractors to come out and help you install it on. That's right. That's right.
So would ADUs be sort of similar to what we're talking about here?
First, let's clarify. ADU, I do know that one. Auxiliary dwelling units is what you're talking about there. Not confused with the NHL earlier. You got to be careful using these acronyms because then everybody knows them. Not exactly, because auxiliary dwelling units are typically much smaller than your modular home. And because of it, too, like, they're never going to meet the standard building codes. The reason why auxiliary dwelling units have become a very much more common thing is because the, housing market crisis and the, affordable housing crisis. So a lot of municipalities have granted or allowed auxiliary dwelling units in certain zonings, but that's by special ordinances, not a commonly accepted practice state or countrywide. And the reason why I'm saying this, when you're dealing with a home being installed on a lot, most municipalities have like minimum square footages of like 1,000 square feet. And auxiliary dwelling units are typically allowed to be smaller than that depending on the municipality. So similar concept, but most of the time your ADUs are not going to fall into the same category of modular homes because they're not big enough to be a full-fledged modular. So here's where, okay, I'm gonna take a minute. We're about to change gears here. Okay, we've been talking about fixtures. We've been talking about personal property versus real property. And folks, do you remember yesterday when we first got in this section, and I warned you that there is a certain piece of this section that is the first big level of, oh, that sucks. This is it. It wasn't that. Okay, it was none of the stuff we were just talking about. This is the, oh, that sucks. Cheyenne is agreeing. She's like, facts. Absolutely facts. Yeah. Bree says, are tiny homes considered real property or mobile homes? Neither. I mean, they're more closely related to mobile homes because they are personal property. But yet again, tiny homes, because of what I just said, they can't even be converted to real property because they don't meet the size criteria. Most municipalities have a minimum of like 1,000 square feet for a dwelling to be a dwelling. And most tiny homes are smaller than that. And so they will never be able to be converted unless something changes in most municipalities. So they're just personal property and will typically stay personal property. So it starts out okay. Let's just discuss the word estate. You've heard this word. This is a real estate class, and somebody's estate, the estate of this person, the whatever. You've heard the word estate before. For the sake of this class, the word estate means what level of interest you have in a property. And I don't mean like, dang, that's a nice property, I want to buy it a drink or whatever. What I mean is interest as in like a relationship to the property. That's all it means. If I say estate, like what level of relationship do you have to a property? Folks, can we all agree that if you own a house, you have some type of relationship to that house? Yeah, it is an ownership relationship if you own the house. Well, can we all agree if you're renting a house, you also have some type of relationship to that house? It's a relationship of leasing, right? And so when we're talking about an estate, we're talking about what kind of relationship or interest do you have in a property. That's all this word estate means. And so as I just did, we can break it into two broad categories. Estates of ownership, called freehold estates, and estates not of ownership, we call non-freehold estates. Now, non-freehold estates are also commonly referred to as leasehold estates because you don't own it, but you're leasing it. You still have a relationship. So freehold, estates of ownership, non-freehold, estates not of ownership. Here's the thing. I'm about to switch the slide over to a chart. And looking at the chart, you probably are not going to love it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just slowly walk you through the chart. Folks, don't panic. Because I have slides for each of these things, I just find that some people get so focused on the words on the screen that they don't listen to what I'm saying. And so I just like to just talk you through it initially, and then I'll give you the slides that reinforce what I said. And here's one other big thing I need you to listen to me on, okay? I want you to listen to these words very carefully. As I start teaching you some of these things, you're going to think to yourself, that doesn't make sense. Wrong. It doesn't make sense to you. Just because it doesn't make sense to you doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. Is everybody with me on this? Let me just kind of give you like a generic example of what I mean here. Folks, if I was to tell you that, let's just go back to Microsoft, because we've already had conversations about Microsoft. If I was to tell you that Microsoft, when they formed as an entity, had the option of forming a limited liability company, a partnership, or a corporation, and I told you they picked corporation, do any of you know why they picked corporation? Like, don't guess. Literally know exactly why. Sure, but it's kind of facetious. When Microsoft created an entity, they had the choice of a partnership, a limited liability, or a company, or a corporation, and they elected to form a corporation. My question was, do any of you know exactly why Microsoft elected to form a corporation over the other two entities?
Tax reasons?
That's a guess. I can hear it in your voice. You're guessing. So don't guess. Do any of you know exactly why?
Tax reasons.
It's still a guess.
I think it like protects like the person who started the corporation. Again, I'm guessing.
Folks, here's the thing.
Right?
Here's the thing. It doesn't matter. None of you need to know why they picked it. Can we all agree that people smarter than us in this room, who were their attorneys and their advisors, said you need to do this over that? It doesn't matter why they picked it. Do you get what I'm going at here? We don't need to know why they picked corporation. There was a reason. That has nothing to do with estates, folks. I'm trying to make a point here that I'm going to teach you stuff and you're going to be like, this doesn't make sense to you. But it does make sense to some people. Everybody with me? Yeah. There's a method to the madness. I got to make sure you're with me, because otherwise you're going to be like, well, I don't get it. Why would anybody do it? Hang tight, all right? So here's the chart that you're like, ugh, probably don't love this. I get it. So right here at the top, we've got, of course, your estates in general, right? Some type of relationship to a property. And then the freehold and the non-freehold. We'll talk about the non-freehold later. Right now we're focusing on the freehold. More specifically, we're going to focus on the left side of the freehold first. So let's go down this way. This first one that you see says fee simple. Okay? Fee simple. Now, when you see the word fee, fee means that it is always, well, it's permanent, but it's also always inheritable. Fee estates are always inheritable. What do you think I mean when I say inheritable?
It can be passed on.
You can will it. That's what I mean. So everything on this side is what we call an estate of inheritance. You can will it to somebody. Now, for the sake of the test, when you see the word fee simple or fee simple absolute, they mean the same thing on the test. Okay? So I'm going to focus on this one because it just helps you understand. Fee simple absolute is a concept of ownership where you own the property with no restrictions. And when we're dealing with property ownership, there are times that there are two main things that are restricted. Sometimes we restrict your use. Sometimes we restrict how long you're going to own it. Well, when I say fee simple absolute, neither are restricted. Let's stop for a second, because I need you to understand something so that you don't get this confused on the test. Folks, if you own a home right now, you own it fee simple absolute. Let that sink in. Does anybody have a problem with that right there? Let's go back to Jack. Jack, you own that property in the mountains. Are you restricted on your use of it?
Only by the HOA.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Don't get so caught up on this no restrictions, folks. Here's what I mean. Even those of us who own properties, right? We own them fee simple absolute. When I say no restrictions, I mean there's no restrictions powerful enough to remove you from your ownership. If you don't follow HOAs or restrictive covenants, you will get fines, you will get nasty letters, but you don't automatically stop owning your property. Does that make sense for everybody? So when I say no restrictions, I don't mean there's none. There are still public and private land use controls. It's just that there are fines and criminal penalties for violating those. Nobody takes your property from you automatically, though. Is everybody okay with that statement? So when I say no restrictions, I mean no restrictions powerful enough to remove you from your ownership just like that. That's what I mean. And you'll see why that's important in just a second. So fee simple absolute is the highest and best form of ownership. We're not restricting how long you own it, and we're not restricting your use of the property. Public and private land use controls maybe, but your ownership is not restricted. So when I say we're not restricting time, well, folks, if you own a house right now, how long are you going to own it for? Until you decide to sell it. Could be 5 years, could be 20 years, could be 90 years, could be 80 years. Who knows, right? I don't know. So, fee simple absolute. What you got? Parker, you got a question? No?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Fee simple absolute, highest and best form of ownership. Sinful says, give me an example. Hang tight. This is going to make a lot more sense when I introduce this other category, okay? So let's go right here. Fee simple defeasible. Folks, I want you to look at that word defeasible. What word does that sound like?
Defeatable.
Defeat. Defeat. Folks, this is ownership that is restricted. In other words, it is ownership where if you don't follow certain rules, you could defeat your ownership. You could end up not owning it anymore. Fee simple defeasible. You could defeat your ownership. Now there's another name for it, and this name is equally as testable as this name. The other name is qualified fee. Well, if you think about the meaning, it's very similar. You have to qualify for your ownership. So in other words, if you don't follow rules, you could defeat your ownership, or if you don't follow rules, you no longer qualify for the ownership. So this is a type of ownership where we are restricting not your time that you can own it, but your use of the property. And this use restriction is so powerful that if you break the rules, you don't own it anymore. See the difference? If you break HOA rules, they're going to send you a nasty gram and a fine. If you break this rule, you don't own the property anymore. It's pretty severe, isn't it? So let's take it a step further. Fee simple defeasible, also called qualified fee, is the blanketed category. There are two subcategories within it. Fee simple determinable and fee simple subject to a condition subsequent is the full word. It's a mouthful. Let's focus on determinable first. What you got, Raphael?
Hey, just wondering,
restriction could, end up.
Yeah, hang tight. I'm gonna get there.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I'm always gonna get there. So, fee simple determinable. Folks, we have determined the one allowable use of the property. So let me give you an example to Raphael's point. Raphael, I'm giving you this property and it's yours forever so long as you only ever use it as a horse farm. You have one allowable use. If you use it for a horse farm, it is yours forever. But if you ever stop using it as a horse farm, just like that, it's not yours anymore. It would go back to me. I was the grantor. I gave you the property. You were the grantee. You received it. And I gave it to you, fee simple, determinable. Said, it's yours so long as you only ever use it as a horse farm. And if you stop, this restriction is so powerful that the property automatically goes back to me. I own it. Doesn't matter if you paid for it. Doesn't matter if I gifted it to you. Doesn't matter if I willed it to you. Doesn't matter. This is written in such a way that I get it back. Does that make sense? Fee simple determinable says you've got this one allowable use. This is the only thing you can use it for. If you don't use it for that, you lose the property. And I promise I'm going to give you multiple examples of all these. I'm just trying to lay a foundation here. So this other one that's a mouthful, told you the full name is fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. What this says is you can do whatever you want with the property so long as you don't do this one thing. Raphael, it's yours. This is your property so long as you never sell alcohol on the property. You can have a restaurant. You can have a horse farm. You can have a grocery store. You can have all these things, but you just can't sell alcohol at any of them. Do whatever you want, but this one thing I told you can't do. See the difference? What you got, Raphael?
So basically, it's just a way of restricting someone from competing. Let's say if you have farmland, one can plant stuff, but they cannot compete in planting something like that.
It could potentially be used for something like that. Typically, you wouldn't make it so powerful for something. You'd put some restrictive covenants on it. You'd put some deed restrictions. Understand that people put deed restrictions on properties all the time, but deed restrictions are just like they can force you to stop if you violate them, but you're not going to lose your ownership. These restrictions are so powerful that you can lose your ownership very easily. Bree says, could there be terms, or in other words, duration set on these defeasibles? Sure. Everything's possible within a deed. They could put, for 50 years, you've got to abide by these rules. And after 50 years, then they're gone. You absolutely could put that in there. These are all things outlined on the deed. Now, folks, here's the thing, okay? I'm sure it does get a little bit worse, but I'm sure your brains are already kind of hurting. Let me let you take your next break of the night, and then I'm going to explain. I'm going to give you some real-world tie-in here to help you understand this a little bit more. So